There are many reasons why I love my local Flesh and Blood community. In addition to the pure respect I have for many of them, not only as players but as individuals, probably the biggest reason is our ability, as a community, to have rational and open discussions around gaming-related topics, no matter how emotional or controversial they may be. Not only does everyone listen and provide input, but they do so respectfully. What's more, it's pretty rare that I walk away from one of these conversations without something to think about or my, good point. Now to you, I grant that this may sound simple and not remarkable, but it's not something that we see across the Flesh and Blood community at large, meaning conversations that are often driven by the vocal minority. One of these driving conversations as of late across the wider community is one of bans or erratas. Plunder Run, of course, is the poster child as of late for these conversations, but Briar and even Snapdragon Scalers have worked their way into them as well. Now tonight at our skirmish at Gongai, this is what several of us were talking about in between rounds. So despite having struggled with developing this video over the last week or so, I figured I'd come back tonight with everything fresh in my head and attack it. So tonight I wanted to take on the concept of bans and erratas in a game such as Flesh and Blood, relatively new, but also a non-rotating format game where bans will certainly, without question, become a more prevalent thing as the game expands. But what's more, I want to talk about something that I believe most players do not consider when discussing bans and erratas themselves. And this is the responsibility and design of the card game company itself to not put existing cards in a place where a ban is necessary, which is especially impactful in a non-rotating game. In short, what I mean is that when a new card comes out and makes people call for the banning of a card that had been printed sets ago, isn't that an odd situation in of itself? And does the prevalence of a card within any format make it, in of itself, worthy of a ban? So in today's cast, yes folks, it's a beer chat, we're discussing the ever-present balance of existing cards, game evolution, design limiting cards, bulletproofing design, and rigorous in-depth field testing, or the lack thereof. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hey there, Flesh and Blood folks. Welcome back to Dice Commando and Go Again, a fabulous cast. I am Andrew with you here as always, and man, I've had a great day a full day of Flesh and Blood. I woke up this morning, did some family stuff, I took the dog for a walk, and then jetted out the door to Gongai to get set up and prepared for the skirmish event we had today. It was a Tales of Aria draft. Ran that today. I think it went well. I wasn't aware of any issues as a judge, which either means I'm really bad at my job or there were no major issues. So, I mean, I guess either way, I can stick my head in the sand and pretend it went. No, but I really think everybody left today happy. Yeah, it was a good time. I mean, I think people are a little overdrafting, and by overdrafting, I don't mean they're drafting too much. I think people have kind of moved past draft, like they're ready for not having to draft anymore. But, I mean, it was still a really good time. We hung out as individuals of the community and played Flesh and Blood, and that's a pretty good Saturday, right? So, as I mentioned in the intro, one of the conversations I had with people today, specifically Adam and Billy, but I think there were some other people, but I mean, either way, right? I like hearing everybody's different perspectives and considering them. But so we were talking about kind of the conversations going on in the community right now about Briar and Plunder Run in particular, and bans, erratas, and all that. And, like I mentioned also, I had seen I think there was a video earlier this week where someone had, I don't know whether he was calling for it or basically just questioning it, but he was talking about Snapdragon Scalers being too prevalent and maybe it needed something. And it was really an interesting topic to me. So I thought the best way to handle this, because like I said, I've been struggling with it for a week, trying to figure out how really to approach it, write a script for it or whatever. And I figured maybe we just beer chat this, right? And kind of get some bullet notes up and kind of go through it. Because what I want to do primarily is I don't really want to present my opinion either way on whether I think Plunder Run should or shouldn't be banned. Instead, I want to present my opinion or my take overall on, I think, something that a lot of people are missing in the ban conversations. And I think a lot of people who haven't played, there are a number of people in Flesh and Blood who haven't played non-rotating format games as its standard format. A game that doesn't have rotation as its standard format. I think there's a number of people in Flesh and Blood who haven't played that before. So I think that they need to, I think that a lot of people, a portion of the community, I think a portion of the community needs to reset their mindset on the responsibility of the company and the playtesters and the design team. Let's say that. Let's say the responsibility of the design team in bans, right? Now, let's go ahead and baseline our discussion and talk about the first ever ban in Flesh and Blood, right? And this was, as many of you know, Drone of Brutality, right? The reason Drone of Brutality was banned, well, let's read it. If Drone of Brutality would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, instead put it on the bottom of your deck, right? Which means that if you defended with it, if you attacked with it, if it was discarded, specifically if you defended with it, right? That was the true abuse in that case. It would go on the bottom of your deck, right? So the reason that this card was banned wasn't because it was broken. It was because the card did something that was fundamentally against the core value of Flesh and Blood, right? It was fundamentally against what the designers, what the original designers of the game wanted. It fundamentally went against how the designers of the game wanted the game to work, right? It was effectively breaking rules of the game. Okay, so they banned it, right? And the reason that we're talking about that is really the card recycling, the non-fatigue aspect, right? Blocking is supposed to be a permanent, right? Blocking without paying or whatever is supposed to be a permanent thing. In this case, it didn't, right? So anyway, I think you guys get it. I mean, this one's been talked about at length. Most people are on board and understand it, and fair enough, right? So that is, in my opinion, this is a perfect ban, because it's like, look, this was something we designed, and once it got in true play environment, we realized that it just was fundamentally flawed, right? I think that's right. The word broken is really hard to quantify in these type of games because it's a matter of opinion. But something that's flawed, right? I think that's a better way to say it, right? Drone of Brutality was fundamentally flawed because it went outside of the confines of the game design, right? That's how I see it. So this was a good, and I think most people didn't fundamentally have a problem with Drone of Brutality, right? Now, the rarity of it may have been a factor, which we'll talk about later, right? So some of the recent discussions, I mean, it's Briar started a lot of it, right? Let's be honest, but it's not Briar Briar's a part of my overall argument, but much of the conversation right now is about the Plunder Run should be banned because Plunder Run is being played by everybody. Okay. I challenge, though, there's a couple things I challenge about that statement. The first one I want to challenge is the prevalence argument, right? The ubiquitousness argument, right? Just because something's in every deck doesn't mean that it's necessarily bannable, broken, whatever, right? It doesn't mean that it should be banned, right? And one of the reasons that I'm triggered, right, and I actually, to be clear here, I actually understand one of the reasons that people are after Plunder Run, right? So let's go ahead on, we'll kind of skip on to my bulletproofing argument here, right? But this card was not bulletproofed, right? In its original design, the card was not bulletproofed because it says the next time an attack action card you control hits, draw a card, right? It's not the next card gains if it hits, draw a card. It's the next time, right? Which means that Plunder Run carries for the whole turn, right? And I think what we're starting to see is effects like that are very, very, very strong in these go-wide strategies, right? Which the go-wide strategies tend to be more efficient and better. I mean, that's just what we're seeing early. And by early, I mean, we're only, 5, 6 sets into this game, right? Depending on when you're watching this video. Okay, so this card was fine in its day, but was not bulletproofed for the future, right? So I think what many people are arguing in the ban isn't necessarily that Plunder Run itself is a problem, but that Plunder Run is design limiting for cards in the future, which is a fair argument. And by design limiting, what we mean by that is that it will, because if assuming that every card ever will be playtested with every card ever, it would mean that you couldn't design things that worked with it, right? Or didn't work with it intentionally or whatever, right? It would limit the ability, it would limit the upward ceiling of future stuff, right? I mean, that's what design limiting means, right? So that's one side of it. But I think a lot of it is being driven by, and to be fair, the design limiting portion is always a very valid thing, especially in these games, right? And in non-rotating games, I mean in any game, but in non-rotating games, especially because it doesn't go away, right? So it's design limiting in perpetuity if you don't get rid of it, right? That's why it carries more weight in a design or non-rotating game. The argument, though, that the card should be banned because it's in every deck, I mean, yes, good cards make their way into every deck, but I haven't heard anybody, right? This is my main thing, is I haven't heard anybody claiming that Enlightened Strike should be banned. And I haven't heard anybody claiming that Command and Conquer should be banned. And if you look at the decks, E-Strike and Command and Conquer are in almost every deck. So why is it that people are calling for Plunder Run, but not at the same time calling for an E-Strike and a Command and Conquer ban? And the only logical conclusion I can come to is that one is a $1 card. I mean, I don't know if it's $1 anymore because it's in such high demand right now, especially with art going out. But stick with me, right? It's a cheap card versus a $100 card. That's the only argument I can come up with as to how you would argue, well, prevalence is a problem. If it's in every deck, that's a problem. Well, so is E-Strike and Command and Conquer. No one's calling for those to be banned, right? So is it really that? Is it really that? Maybe it is. It just bothers me to say, well, this is in every deck, so it must be too good. Well, fine, but then you're not calling for other. You know what I'm saying? You can't have your Command and Conquer and E-Strike and eat it too, right? So that's just my take. Is you have to apply it equally. And I want to be very clear, 100% clear here. If anybody's taking it that I'm arguing that Command and Conquer and E-Strike should be banned, that's not what I'm arguing. What I'm saying is that if your argument is that Plunder Run is ever in every deck and it must thus be too good, E-Strike and Command and Conquer should also be on that list, right? That's what I'm arguing. And I'm using that to disprove the original argument. Again, so I'm not saying Plunder Run isn't a problem because, again, we already just talked about the bulletproofing thing. I do think Plunder Run has a bulletproofing problem. I do. But using the argument that it's too prevalent it's a weak argument, right? So, and then we talked about bulletproofing thing, right? Bulletproofing of it, talking about the next card, that's clearly something they're still designing with, right? So what you could say on Plunder Run's it was in one of the initial, because, I think most of us, Arcane Rising was almost guaranteed to have been designed before Welcome to Wrathe was released, right? The two sets basically, according to the lore of Fab design, the two sets already existed before release, right? And even logistically they had to, but supposedly these were in development years and years and years and decades ago, right? So, missing the bulletproof on Plunder Run, fine, it happened. But Electrify reads the same way, right? Electrify is a brand new card that just came out, and it reads the same way the next time an attack action card set. Now, it's not card draw. And one thing I do want to grant, which I think is a good theme for this, and that's I think why it bothers a lot of people on Plunder Run, is currently Flesh and Blood is the most card-limited game that I've ever played, right? Your resources don't come from mana. Your resources come from your hand. Your defense comes from your life comes from your hand. Well, it's not your life, but you know what I mean, right? Your defense comes from your hand. Your resources come from your hand. Your motive of attacking comes from your hand. It is the most card-limited game I've ever played. And card draw is arguable. Card draw in any of these games is always good. But in Flesh and Blood being, like I said, the most card-limited game I've ever played, I think that having card draw in this game is probably arguably more impactful than any game I've ever played. Right? I'm not trying to groundbreak statement there, but I understand why having the ability to, if you hit at all throughout the turn, I'm just saying, I understand that argument. If you hit it all throughout this turn, as long as I play Plunder Run first, if anything I play hits throughout this turn, I get to draw a card. That's a big friggin' deal. So I understand the argument on Plunder Run, right? I just think that, the prevalence argument is not a good argument. Now, if you believe that it's the design limiting card, I can get on board with that. But that brings me to kind of my larger point, or overall finishing point, whatever you want to call it tonight, is that I don't think that we as a community, especially in these conversations, really hold the company, really hold the design teams accountable enough for their design, right? So when we say, right, I mean, think about it. So everyone who's coming back today and saying, man, Plunder Run really needs banned because it's just making Briar really good. It was an intentional drink pause, because think about that, right? Briar was developed after Plunder Run existed, right? So again, you can say, Arc, Crucible, Crucible probably not, but maybe even Monarch was in concept before all these other ones hit, but they didn't go to print, they didn't go to testing or whatever on Briar until the other sets were already in existence. That is a fact. So to come back and say, well, it's Plunder Run is the reason that Briar's broken. Again, I'm not saying Briar is broken. I'm just saying on that argument, right? Plunder Run is what really makes Briar sing. I call BS, because the accountability should not be, you should not be blaming a previous card that already exists for a new card that comes in being OP, right? That new card that coming in, if it's really good because it's abusing old cards, that is on the design team. And I don't understand why we let people off the hook for that. It is the design teams or the testing team or whatever, right? But the design team at large, it is their responsibility in a non-rotating format to consider all of the impacts of that card pool. And to drop a new card, and for everyone to say, well, the reason that this new card is really, really good is because of this card that's been in existence for 2 years. Well, 1.5 years, I guess. But you see my point, right? Why are we letting them off the hook for that by calling for a ban on a previously existing card that is, up until now, been essentially fine? Now, if your argument is that it's design limiting in the future, again, I can get on board with that. But isn't it, but you see what I'm saying, right? By waiting for a card to release before you have a problem with the old card, shouldn't it be the new card that's the target? Now, on the Briar thing, that's a different, it's related. It's not different. It's the same argument, but, I know there have been many proposals to Briar to change her to be more elemental, which I think would probably keep her more in line with the theme of the set. 100% on board with that. I personally think Rosetta Thorn is the real problem, not Briar, because are we ever going to have a better weapon than Rosetta Thorn? Honestly, I hope to God not, right? But anyway, I'm going into the weeds on that, but that's what happens on Beer Chat sometimes, right? So look, the takeaway here is, I'm not saying anyone did a bad job. I'm not saying anyone necessarily screwed up, right? Like I said, I don't want to give up, because you can't win in a conversation like this, right? So I'm not saying we should ban Plunder Run. I'm not saying we shouldn't ban Plunder Run. But what I'm saying is, a card that's been fine for 3 or 4 sets, a new card gets released, and a hero of, it's not like they release some card that, in fringe cases pairs with it for an infinite loop or something. That happens all the time in these type of games, and fine, we get it. You missed it in playtesting. We get that. But to bring in a hero, which is a core fundamental starting point of the game, and then to say the reason that hero is way too strong is because of a card that's existed for 1.5 years, I'm sorry. It's real hard for me to get on board with that, right? So, again, is Plunder Run a problem? Could be. It could be. But Briar was developed with Plunder Run in existence and not deemed to be a problem. Right? So again, whether you think Briar's a problem, whether you don't, whether you think Plunder Run's a problem, whether you don't, to make the argument that Plunder Run is the reason that Briar's broken, I cannot get on board with that. I just can't. right? It is the responsibility of the design team. And we as players, instead of getting on board, like by basically getting on board and saying, yep, it's not Briar that's a problem, it's Plunder Run, we're letting the design team off the hook. And that's not good for the long-term health of this game, right? And I'm not saying that like we beat down their doors and hold them accountable or anything, right? But if we're going to like continually let them power creep to whatever extent power creep will happen in this game, if we're going to let them power creep and then justify the power creep by saying, well, it's not the new card, it's the old cards, come on. Like, we can do better than that. Like, we're smarter. Like, we are. Like, this game's hard. People who are good at this game are really freaking smart. Like, I don't think I'm a dum-dum and, like, I'm middle of the pack in this game, right? There are some seriously smart people playing this game. And for us as a community to come back and say, well, it's not the new thing, it's the old thing. Nuh-uh, because the new thing was built when the old thing was there, right? So, I don't know. Maybe it's just me as an old man fighting the new wave, right? My entire life. But, no, I mean, but hopefully you guys understand what I'm saying here, right? Is to blame old things or to want to ban existing things in order to make the new things more balanced is not the right angle, because it shouldn't have been developed in that way in the first place, right? So by advocating for and embracing that, we're only encouraging more of it in the future, right? And I think I just had about 5 minutes of ranting to get to that point, but that's what I'm saying is by us as a community advocating for and embracing it, we encourage more of it in the future, right? So, what's going to be like Plunder Run gets done did, and Briar gets done did, and everything's okay again, and then in Everfest, some other card comes out, and you're like, well, damn, that is so broken with Nimbleism. We go kill Nimbleism? That's like a fundamental card. I mean, I'm speculating I'm being ridiculous here, right? But you see my point, right? The card already existed. They could have tested against it, and they either didn't or they decided it was a problem. Either way, we're letting them off the hook for that. And shouldn't the fix be on the new card? Or shouldn't the check and balance be on the new card? I don't know. Either way, that's that. Like I said, that's just what I wanted to talk about tonight, because that's my take on it. Again, I don't know if Plunder Run should go away. I mean, I personally used Plunder Run in my Azalea deck forever and didn't have any problems. I mean, maybe because it was Azalea, but like, I don't remember many calls of Plunder Run being broken back in Chane. Like, people played Blue Plunder Run, because why the hell wouldn't you? But like, yeah, but Plunder Run's in every deck, so we better ban it. Right up there with E-Strike and CNC. No, I mean, I'm kidding, but kind of not, right? I mean, if prevalence means ban, then there's a lot more cards that should be on the chopping block. But we're not talking about those, because probably you've got the $100 card and everybody else doesn't, and that would hurt you, right? So, yes, I am calling you a hypocrite, right? I am calling you a hypocrite. I mean, not you particularly, but I'm calling those people a hypocrite. Calling them out. So, anyway, folks, thanks for joining me for tonight's beer chat. Hopefully you guys have been typing as we've gone. Yeah. Hopefully you guys have been typing as we've been going. I'm interested to hear your feedback about this, where you guys stand. But, overall, whether something should or whether something shouldn't, I think that we need to be fair in how we consider that, not just based on what we want to play today. So, anyway, that'll do it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Had a great time today, loving this game and everything that comes with it. Love my community right now. Come join us. Come play with us. I think you'll have a good time too. Nothing else, folks. Go Commando.